Good evening, and welcome to Real Sports. This being March, a lot of fans and students are being consumed by tournament madness. But for millions of Americans, the enormous appeal of the NCAA basketball tournament has less to do with buzzer-beating baskets than with whether the favorite will beat the point spread.
Always did that. They
had to
shave points in order not to pay back their gambling debt.
They had no choice. Either that or, the threat is we're going to put you in a hospital.
In May of 2018, the Supreme Court of the United States struck down the Professional and Amateur Sports Protection Act of 1992 that prohibited all but 4 states from allowing legalized sports gambling. State lawmakers around the country are debating on whether or not to use this new stream of revenue because of the issues that may arise. Some of the state's challenges including opposition from casino operating tribes, as well as opponents claiming that encouraging a gambling habit could lead to many negative effects on the community. However, the most discussed argument against legalized gambling is the negative impact that will occur to the integrity of the sports themselves. Legalization leads to more money leads to more corruption.
Remember, people, it's never about winning or losing. It's about the spread.
When a legal or illegal sportsbook opens up betting on a game, they create a point spread which determines how much the stronger team, aka the favorite, is expected to win by over the weaker team, aka the underdog. Underdog bettors can collect even when their team loses, as long as that team loses by fewer points than the spread set out by the bookmakers. Webster Dictionary defines point shaving as, quote, an attempt as by a member of the team favored to win, to influence the final score of a game, so that the predicted winner wins by less than the point spread. Conspirators bribe players from the stronger team with money or other types of compensation in order to shave points, so the team will not cover the spread. The gamblers will then bet on the underdog team, expecting them to lose. However, they will not lose by enough points according to the spread, in turn, winning the bet for those within the conspiracy. Since the margin of loss or victory is generally less important than the ultimate outcome, these schemes appear to participants as less harmful than schemes requiring them to lose on purpose. All sports have been the victim of point shaving schemes one time or another. However, conspirators who have participated in point shaving have usually decided to use the sport of basketball. It is believed that it's easier to point shave a basketball game because of the fast-paced style, as well as the low amount of people on the court at a time, compared to that in football or baseball. With this new era of legalized sports betting, leagues such as the NBA and the NCAA, as well as sports betting commissions, will place a heightened emphasis on making sure point shaving does not affect the outcome of their games, but they can't be aware of everything. The NCAA itself has had a vast history of point shaving scandals within the sport of Division I basketball. With the expansion of legalized gambling, there's a fear that point shaving could become an epidemic, and games in college will be fixed now more than ever.
We're talking about students who are running operations in the tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Our coaches and our athletic directors are scared about this issue.
The NBA has had point shaving scandals in the past, but it seems to be more prevalent in the NCAA with college students. Quote, you have no idea how easy it is to influence these kids to shave points, claimed Michael Franzese, a former mob boss who allegedly fixed both professional and college games. Intuitively, it is easier to think that amateur athletes are more likely to shave points for monetary compensation, rather than professionals who are under contract being paid by a team. The NCAA has tried to combat the law of bribe money by including strict rules in their bylaws prohibiting sports wagering activities. In the NCAA Division I bylaws, it states that a college athlete cannot provide any information about games to any gamblers, solicit a bet on any intercollegiate team, accept a bet on any team representing the institution, or participate in any gambling activity that involves intercollegiate athletics or professional athletics. The chance to get easy money and the nationwide acceptance of gambling, coupled with the increased exposure of sports, have turned contemporary teenagers into a generation of gamblers. With legalized gambling, college students now have easy access to place bets instead of scrounging the underworld to find an illegal bookie. In a state where sports betting is legalized, gamblers can now download sportsbook apps where a multitude of bets are just clicks away in the comfort of their homes or dorm rooms. 40 years ago, the average age of a participant at a Gamblers Anonymous meeting was 50 years old. 20 years ago, it was only 30. As of 2012, the average sports gambler is largely made up from the 18 to 34 age range. As the years go by, the age range keeps decreasing, which opens up the possibility for more point-shaving scandals to hit the NCAA. A college student can get inside information from a fellow classmate who is a student athlete, which sequentially can get the ball rolling on a scandal that hurts the whole school. The student can tell a bookie or other gamblers, and eventually this knowledge can fall into the wrong hands. Coaches, athletic administrators, and university faculty can lose their jobs. Schools can lose donations from alumni, and victories can be deleted from history, such as when St. Joseph's University was stripped of its third-place finish in the 1961 NCAA basketball tournament. Even if that seems harsh, in the history of the NCAA, there have been even more intense punishments for participating in a point-shaving scheme. Some punishments even changing the entire fabric of a school's athletic program.
Like the song says, you're a number one, top of the heap. But when your luck runs dry, watch out. That's when the nights grow long and the streets go cold.
In 1950, City College of New York became the first and only team in men's college basketball history to win both the National Invitation Tournament and the NCAA Tournament in the same year. A year after their historic championship run, multiple players from CCNY were arrested for being involved in one of the largest point-shaving schemes in college basketball history. The scheme, which involved 4 schools in New York City and 3 others across the country, began in the summer of 1949 in the upstate New York region known as the Catskills. Players from New York and from elsewhere around the country would get hired by the hotels in the mountains, supposedly to work as waiters or busboys or lifeguards, because by NCAA rules the hotels were not allowed to pay them to play basketball, but really that's exactly what they were doing. While these selected players were up in the Catskills, they were separated into teams correlated by the hotels they were supposedly working at, and would compete in basketball games. During these games there was always a raffle with numbers on tickets, and whoever came closest to the 2 teams' combined score at the end of the game would win the pot. Eventually, gamblers would start to realize and say, you know what, if you can arrange it so that my number is the final number, I will give you half the pot. And that was where these players first began to take money to control points. During the 1949 to 1951 seasons, various CCNY players would go on to shave points for monetary compensation in multiple games while on their way to winning the NIT and the NCAA tournaments. The unraveling of the CCNY point-shaving scheme actually started because of students from an in-state rival college. In January of 1951, a former Manhattan College basketball player, Henry Hank Pope, approached Manhattan junior Junius Kellogg, the first African-American to play basketball for Manhattan College, offering around $1,000 to shave points during an upcoming game. Kellogg refused the offer and went to head coach Ken Norton, telling him about the proposition from the former player. Norton, Manhattan College's president, decided to inform the police of the offer, and the police directed Kellogg to play along with Pope and act like he was accepting the offer while wearing a wire. Kellogg and Hank met and discussed how Kellogg would be able to fix the upcoming DePaul game on January 16th. Hank went into detail on how to shave points and how to be able to make it not look noticeable because he knew from experience. Hank at the time was Manhattan College's all-time leading scorer and helped fix games the previous year. The night of the DePaul game, Hank was arrested at his home and implicated his former teammate Jack Burns, who also accepted money to shave points during the 49 season. On January 17th, Hank and Burns, plus 3 others, were all booked on bribery and conspiracy charges. The arrests against the Manhattan College conspirators opened the door for the Brooklyn DA, Miles McDonald, to start cracking down on the wide-ranging gambling syndicate that the CCNY point shavers were a part of. Quickly after the Manhattan College arrests, McDonald received evidence through a wiretap that proved CCNY players Ed Warner, Ed Roman, and Al Roth were involved in a point-shaving scheme that was a component of the illegal gambling empire connected to Harry Gross, a bookmaker in Brooklyn. Authorities estimate that Harry Gross's gambling syndicate was taking in over $20 million a year in illegal sports bets. On February 17, 1951, after returning from a game in Philadelphia, Ed Warner, Ed Roman, and Al Roth were arrested on charges of bribery. In Penn Station, after a win against Temple, the CCNY players were handcuffed and taken to the district attorney's office. Harry Gross pled guilty to 66 counts of gambling and bribery and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. On March 26, 1951, several other players from CCNY were arrested for their involvement in the point-shaving plot. Roman, Roth, and a few others all received suspended sentences, while Ed Warner was the only one to serve prison time, receiving a 6-month sentence. In the months following all these arrests, New York District Attorney Frank Hogan arrested 32 Division I players from 7 different schools across the country, all connected to the illegal gambling syndicate of Harry Gross. 3 Long Island University players, including Sherman White, who was named Player of the Year by the Sporting News, were arrested for taking bribes to outright throw games during the 1950 season. White was forced to miss the last few games of the year, and at the time he was averaging 27.7 points per game and was the nation's leading scorer. White was also only 77 total points away from setting a new NCAA single-season scoring record. If that wasn't harsh enough, White received one of the worst punishments handed down to players involved in the point-shaving scheme. White was handed a 12-month sentence to serve at Rikers Island for the bribery charges. Arguably, almost all the schools involved have never recovered from the stench of the 1951 point-shaving scandals. Bradley University is the only team mentioned to be nationally ranked in the NCAA after the arrest from the gambling plot. After the scandal, CCNY de-emphasized the entire athletic program, leading them to fall to Division III status. In the 1960s, Congress realized that the rise of organized crime in the United States has had a vast impact on society, including the world of sports. In 1970, Congress passed the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act, also known as the RICO Act. The RICO Act allowed Congress to go and attack organized crime's main sources of revenue, including sports bookmaking. Before RICO was put into place, multiple statutes were passed to combat organized crime's grip on society. One piece of legislation that was passed was the Wire Act of 1964, which attacked the process of wagering between gamblers and bookmakers. Also prior to RICO, in response to multiple match-fixing and point-shaving scandals in the 1950s and 60s, like the CCNY scandal, Congress passed the Sports Bribery Act of 1964. Basically, the Sports Bribery Act is a statute designed to implement a means for the federal government to target individuals who manipulated the outcomes of sporting events. While most of the cases falling under the Sports Bribery Act are occasions dealing with gamblers who allegedly have manipulated horse races, one of the more prominent cases in the Act's history dealt with former mobster Henry Hill and the Boston College basketball team.
By the time I grew up, there was $30 billion a year in cargo moving through Idlewild Airport. And believe me, we tried to steal every bit of it.
What do you do?
I'm in construction.
He's not Jewish.
Mazel tov.
The idea of the Goodfellas point-shaving scheme began in Pittsburgh in the summer of 1978 by brothers Rocco and Anthony Perla. Rocco Perla was high school friends with Richard Kuhn, the starting center for the Boston College basketball team, and enticed Kuhn to shave points off games in the upcoming season. Kuhn agreed to the bribe, and in concert with the Perlas, hatched the outline of the scheme. The Perlas with Kuhn would pick out certain basketball games for Boston College's 78 and 79 season, and with Kuhn on the court, would make sure that when BC was the favorite, they would not cover the spread set out by the bookmakers. In order to maximize the potential winnings, the Perlas contacted a friend from New York named Paul Mazzi. Mazzi was known to have a major influence on the New York gambling scene, as well as significant ties to organized crime. Mazzi contacted Henry Hill, and in turn, Hill contacted Jamie the Gent Burke. Burke was a known boss of organized crime and was listening to ensure that if the Perla brothers, Mazzi, and Hill would get caught from the bookmakers they were scheming, they would be protected from harm. Burke, being regarded as the organizer and most influential person of the group, instructed Hill, Mazzi, and Tony Perla to meet with Kuhn and any other BC players that wanted to be a part of the match fixing to begin hatching their plan. At their first meeting in Boston on November 16th, the conspirators decided to first test out their scheme the next month when Boston College played Providence. They believed that BC would be heavy favorites against Providence and that it would be an easy start to see if their scheme would work out. The Providence game was played on December 6th, and Boston College was favored by only 7 points. The first test of the plan was in fact unsuccessful, with Boston College eventually winning the game by 19. At that point, they decided they needed more players on the court than just Kuhn. Hill testified in court that Kuhn convinced 2 players, Ernie Cobb and Jim Sweeney, to also participate in the point-shaving scheme. Kuhn was the only player ever convicted for his role in the scheme. Both Cobb and Sweeney denied participating on the court to actively shave points. However, they mutually admitted to accept bribe money. Now, with allegedly more players involved, the conspirators decided their second test run would be December 16th against Harvard. Boston College was favored by 12 points and ended up only winning the game by 3. After Harvard, they won another game against UCLA, and believing that some bookmakers would become aware of their scheme, the conspirators decided to place a bet on Boston College winning by more than the point spread had them favored by. According to Hill's court testimony, mentioned in United States v. Burke, the group allegedly decided to pick the game against UConn on January 17th. Boston College were favored by around 2 or 3 points, and they believed BC would be able to beat UConn by more than that. In a Sports Illustrated article penned by Henry Hill himself, Hill claimed that UConn game was actually played on January 27th and was a 5 to 6 point spread, and that BC only won the game by 1 point. However, in court documents, the conspirators won another wager and believed that this would lead bookmakers away from realizing their scheme. It was believed that Las Vegas bookmakers were witnessing some discrepancies consistently coming from the Boston College games. It was said that veteran Las Vegas sportsbook managers told them they remembered some buzz about Boston College games at the time, but they didn't see enough red flags to cause them to halt betting and take the games off the board. After some ups and downs with the scheme, but still winning a significant amount of money, the point-shaving scheme started to unravel when Henry Hill was arrested on drug conspiracy charges. Following his arrest, Hill entered into an agreement to turn over information on his prior criminal activities to federal authorities in exchange for being allowed to enter the Witness Protection Program. In a section of his testimony, Hill broke down the BC point-shaving scheme and those who were involved. The other conspirators, including Burke, were all indicted for the point-shaving plan on the basis of the testimony given by Hill. After a 4-week jury trial, all the defendants were convicted on charges under the RICO conspiracy, conspiracy to commit sports bribery, and interstate travel with the intent to commit bribery. Burke, being seen as the main coordinator and with his close ties to organized crime, received the harshest punishment of 20 years. The other conspirators received around 5 to 10 years, with Kuhn, the focal point of the scheme itself, receiving 10 years for his contribution. However, the punishment was later reduced to only 28 months. In 2014, ESPN's award-winning series 30 for 30 would go on to break down the scandal during the 78-79 season in their episode Playing for the Mob. Actor Ray Liotta, who played Henry Hill in Goodfellas, narrated the documentary, going into detail on how this scheme was a part of bringing down one of the most infamous organized crime syndicates in history.
Price dribbling to the circle, bounce to Hot Rod, he drives, wham! Price on the move, whips it inside, a Hot Rod for the dunk!
When I was a little baby, I used to crawl around and make calls sound like and my mama started calling me Hot Rod, and then all my friends pick it up.
Top side to Hot Rod comes into the lane, spins to the basket and puts it in.
On June 18, 1985, Tulane University center John Hot Rod Williams was drafted into the NBA by the Cleveland Cavaliers. Williams would go on to become the franchise's all-time leader in block shots, and ended up all in all having an accomplished career lasting 13 seasons. However, a few months before being drafted, Hot Rod was arrested in connection with a point-shaving scheme that would go on to lead to multiple arrests, numerous resignations, and ultimately lead to the disbanding of the entire Tulane University's men's basketball program. On February 2, 1985, Tulane's basketball team was around 10.5-point favorites for the upcoming game against rival Southern Mississippi. It was alleged that Tulane student Gary Kranz approached senior forward Clyde Eads with an idea to shave points for that night's game. As long as Tulane would win the game by less than 10.5 points, Kranz and his former fraternity brothers David Rothenberg and Mark Olensky would win their bets, while Eads would be compensated with an ounce of cocaine for his involvement in keeping the score down. Eads accepted, however, he realized that he would not be able to keep the score down by himself. Eads went to his fellow teammates, forward John Johnson, guard David Dominique, guard Bobby Thompson, and star center Hot Rod Williams, with the idea to shave points. The teammates all agreed to take part and went to Kranz's apartment to go over exactly how the scheme would take place. After a sloppy first half, Tulane would go on to win by only 1 point. Williams played especially poorly in the first half, making only 1 field goal attempt and finishing with 15 points. The only starter not in the scheme, Marcus Hamilton, led the team with 21 points. After a failed attempt to fix a game on the road between Tulane and Virginia Tech, the conspirators reactivated the scheme and focused on the game between Tulane and Memphis. Olensky later testified that he went to Las Vegas the morning of the game and put in a wager of $17,000 for Memphis State to cover the 6.5-point spread. Tulane led throughout the first half. However, after halftime, Williams went 0 for 2 from the field, 2 for 4 from the line, and had only 1 rebound for the rest of the game. Tulane would go on to lose by 11 points, with skepticism starting to be raised about the players on the court. Olensky would go on to leave Las Vegas with around $35,000, and went on to give $13,000 to divide up between the players involved. Hot Rod later claimed that he received $1,500 after the Memphis State game in his dorm room for participation in the scheme, but he never knew how it got there. Rumors around the campus started circulating that some of the Tulane players might be up to something, but players denied it and went on with the rest of the season as scheduled. About a week after the season ended, attorney Ned Conkey heard the rumor of possible point shaving and began to dive into it with his own investigation, eventually leading Conkey to contacting Orleans Parish District Attorney Harry Connick. No, not that Harry Connick, his father. Connick's office granted immunity to Eads and Johnson for information on all those involved in the scheme and for their testimony against the conspirators. The arrest began on March 26, 1985, with Hot Rod a few months before he was set to be drafted into the NBA. The rest of the conspirators were charged the next day with violating Louisiana sports bribery law. Kranz was also later charged with dealing out cocaine to the players. However, Kranz was given immunity in return to testify against his other co-conspirators. On April 4th, 1985, after the point-shaving scheme became public, came the shocking revelation that head coach Ned Fowler admitted making illegal payments to players during the season. With the stench of the point-shaving scandal, along with the realization of the coaches paying players to play, Tulane University's president, Dr. Eamon Kelly, announced that he was recommending to the university board to drop Tulane's men's intercollegiate basketball program. The board voted to disband the basketball program, and the university was forced to withdraw from the Metro Conference because it required a men's basketball team for the conference membership. Hot Rod, the most high-profile person involved with the plot, ended up being brought to trial twice on 2 counts of sports bribery and 3 counts of conspiracy to commit sports bribery, the third being the failed attempt at Virginia Tech. For the last trial, after deliberating for 4 hours, Hot Rod was found not guilty by the jury. It was said that the crux of the case was the other students participating in the point-shaving scheme, all going against the Hot Rod. It was seen by the jury as an untrustworthy bunch who were just trying to save their own skins. Hot Rod, after the trial, could finally sign his contract with the Cleveland Cavaliers. He could not sign with the team because of the pending outcome of the trial. In 1988, Tulane decided to bring back the men's basketball program, and just 3 years after reinstating it, Tulane, led by head coach Perry Clark, reached the NCAA tournament for the first time in the school's history.
He was intimidated, but he said to me very clearly, and I have respect for him for this, he said, "I will not lose." I said, "Man, I don't want you to lose. Just don't win by more than I tell you."
Steve Headache Smith, starting point guard for the Arizona State Sun Devils, was a small-time gambler, mostly betting on NFL games. Smith was also a potential first-round pick in the upcoming NBA draft, being the leading returning scorer in the Pacific 10 Conference for the 1993-94 season. Sadly, like many addictions, Smith's gambling started spiraling out of control, taking over his life, and he started accumulating more and more debt to Benny Silman, Smith's bookie. Headache Smith once claimed that his debt rose to around $10,000, and Silman came up with a plan for Headache to repay it without giving up any money. "We agreed that I could repay my debt to him by fixing the basketball game," Headache said in court documents from his plea agreement. In return for fixing the game, Silman agreed to pay me about $20,000 per game. Silman brought the idea to friend and entrepreneur Joseph Gagliano, and they together started hatching out the plan. Silman later told ESPN in an interview on Outside the Lines that Headache was not willing to throw games for ASU to outright lose, but when they were big favorites, he'd be willing to shave enough points for Silman and Gagliano to win their bets. Silman and Gagliano went over Arizona State's schedule to see where they would think a large point spread would take place for them to fulfill their plan. Gagliano decided on Arizona State at home against Oregon State on January 27th. It was believed because it was a Thursday before Super Bowl weekend, it would be easy to blend in with a large quantity of bets being placed. Arizona State was the favorite against Oregon State by 14.5. Silman and Gagliano directed Smith to make sure his team did not cover that spread. Gagliano, the morning of the game, went to Las Vegas with around $50,000 to wager through many different sports books. Using at least 30 different sports books, Gagliano kept wagering around $9,900 per bet at each different book in order to avoid filling out a currency transaction report, which is a red flag to the IRS. A transaction report triggers when someone wagers or has a transaction up to $10,000 or more. Also, splitting a large bet into many small increments, the betting line would not change, which, if it did, would also likely raise suspicion. Headache Smith decided to let his teammate, Isaac Burton Jr., in on the scheme for more protection during the game if it was getting close to covering the spread. Headache asked Burton if he'd be willing to miss free throws in order to cover the spread if need be, which Burton agreed to. During the actual game, Headache allowed extra space for shooters in order for them to score against him. However, even with Headache trying to shave points, he ended up scoring a career-high 39 points and tied a Pacific 10 record with 10 three-pointers. The conspirators decided on a quick turnaround for their next attempt of fixing a game. 2 days after the success of the Oregon State game, the crew decided to have Headache shave points against Oregon, which ASU was favored over by 11.5 points. Arizona State won again, but only by 6 points, covering the spread for all the accomplices. Headache merely scored 13 points, but also claimed that he was battling an ankle injury he received during the game. Gagliano claimed in his book, No Gray Areas, that in total, Gagliano and Silman won around $3.3 million combined between the two games over the 3-day stretch. The scheme took a few weeks off and waited till February 20th, 1994, when Arizona State was favored over USC by 9.5 points. The plan was still the same: ASU can win the game, but just cannot cover the spread. Gagliano and a few other people he brought into the scheme decided to up their ante with the amount of money they were going to wager, but kept the same system of going through different sports books. The scheme worked again for the gamblers, but ASU ended up losing the game by 12 points, hurting their chances to reach the NCAA tournament. Benny Silman later claimed that Headache really did not have to shave points because of how badly they played against USC. Quote, "And I remember after the game, Headache coming over to my house and telling me that that's the easiest money he's ever made in his life. And I said, 'What are you talking about?' He went, 'We just got flat out beat. I didn't have to do anything.'" If that were the last game of the scheme, it is possible that the people involved would have never been caught. The spread for the USC game changed drastically before tip-off, raising suspicion and rumors in the gambling community. But because there was still an opportunity for the gamblers to cash in on this opportunity with Headache on the court, they decided to fix one last game on March 5th, 1994, when Arizona State went up against Washington. ASU was favored by 15, so the gamblers believed this would be another easy cover. The wagers continued to multiply, with more gamblers getting in on the scheme. Gagliano and Silman had their accomplices, and they increased their wagers, while someone named Big Red also had associates that he made aware of a possible fix. Also, around the ASU campus itself, there was a substantial amount of rumors that there was a fix, so small-time gamblers wanted in on the game as well. There was such a rush of wagers going towards the one side, the point spread dropped from 15 to 12. The 3-point swing is significant. However, wagers continued to come in, causing the point spread to drop all the way down to only 3 points. The drastic swing caused some sportsbooks to take the game off their list entirely. Sportsbooks around Las Vegas began networking, asking each other what could possibly cause this historic line movement. The head of Caesars Palace Sportsbook claimed that the warning factors were there with numerous people he has never seen before, betting large quantities all on one side. He also claimed that they were willing to bet no matter what the point spread ended up being, which was a huge red flag. It was just too obvious, says the vice president of Westgate Las Vegas Hotel and Casino Superbook. When someone wants to make a bet and they don't care what the line is, that's the red flag. Arizona started the game against Washington, missing their first 14 shots, but ended up coming back and winning by 18 points, losing the bet for all the conspirators. It was later testified that the players were notified at halftime that the game was under scrutiny. All those involved in the scheme lost millions, though more importantly, they started to realize the system was unraveling. Jimmy Vaccaro, the bookmaker at the Mirage, alerted the Nevada Gaming Control Board, the Pac-10, and the FBI of what all the bookmakers in Vegas had heard and witnessed, which launched a full investigation. Federal officials, soon after beginning their investigation, realized it was one of the largest point-shaving scandals in college basketball history. On December 4th, 1997, Silman, Gagliano, and their associates were arrested for sports bribery, conspiracy to commit sports bribery, and charges of interstate transportation and aid of racketeering. Headache and Burton pled guilty in 1997 to conspiracy to commit sports bribery, with Headache serving 1 year in prison and Burton serving 2 months. Benny Silman pled guilty to 5 counts, including sports bribery, racketeering, and money laundering. He served 4 years. Gagliano served 15 months in prison and was forced to pay a $6,000 fine. Steve Headache Smith later admitted in an interview with ESPN in 2002 that he was never in debt $10,000. Headache claimed he chose to say yes and was never really backed into a corner. Quote, I was just in the fast lane. I just wanted the money, you know. It was just something I could not, say no to. I cannot blame Benny. He didn't put a gun to my head. I don't have nothing against him, and there's no way I was going to sit up here and blame him. I mean, I can't blame anybody but myself, because I made the decision. I didn't have to say yes. I chose to say yes.